And it's a great honor to introduce tonight our speaker, Mr. Max Blumenthal, who possesses an impressive award-winning array of work in investigative journalism, media studies and research, and social and political analysis. An alumnus of the University of Pennsylvania, Mr. Blumenthal won the Independent Feature Award of the Online News Association in 2003 for his reporting on the political corruption in Ziojuana, Mexico. His work has also been featured in many media outlets and publications, including the Daily Beast, Democracy Now!, NPR, MSNBC, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera English, and many more. He is currently a Puffin Writing Fellow at the Nation Institute based in New York, and is also the author of Republican Gomorrah, Inside the Movement That Shattered the Party, published in 2010. After tonight's talk, we will take a break for refreshments outside, and we will return to have a Q&A session with Mr. Blumenthal. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Max Blumenthal.
Thanks to the U.Va, SJP, just mainly for existing. 10 years ago, this kind of stuff wasn't happening at all. I think it wasn't happening on a lot of campuses, and it keeps growing. This month, the Anti-Defamation League, which I think would be more appropriately called the Defamation League, for its consistent smearing of advocates of Palestinian human rights and for its attacks on American Muslims, for example, attempting to stop the Park 51 Community Center in New York from being built in Ground Zero, issued a press release complaining about the flood of quote-unquote anti-Israel events. I don't consider these anti-Israel events necessarily. I consider them, events in solidarity with Palestinian people who are fighting for equal rights. And I really think that you owe yourselves a round of applause for that press release, as being part of that flood of justice. Let's broaden this flood. Also, I want to thank you guys for letting me, I'm from DC, come down and do Passover with my family last night. I was in Arizona the night before speaking at ASU, which has a really interesting situation. There's also a lot of intimidation on campus, as here, against Palestine solidarity activists. Usually I can't be with my family for Passover, so we leave a chair open for the prophet Elijah, which is sort of a traditional thing. Elijah is kind of like a hero of mine. He's the ultimate alienated Jew. He defeated the paganistic priests of Baal on Mount Carmel, which is near Haifa today, basically out of reverence for the Jewish God. And he was castigated out of the kingdom of Ahab, who was married to the pagan woman Jezebel. This is a military, powerful kingdom that occupied the area. Is now referred to by the Israeli government as Judea and Samaria. A kingdom where wealth and lucre were revered over spirituality and over justice. And Elijah, this Jewish prophet, spent much of his life in exile, walking alone. I think he's a model for many Jews who feel alone today as they confront a Jewish world, and especially the state of Israel that is increasingly in a moral freefall. Now, I want to talk about something that came up at Arizona, because Arizona is on the border, and many migrants are trying to get into Arizona, trying to get into the U.S. Some of them are looking for economic benefits, and many of them are fleeing, are still fleeing oppression, especially in a country like Guatemala, where the legacy of civil war and genocide is still present. In December, a 19-year-old Mayan from Guatemala was shot in the back by Border Patrol officers on the border and killed on the border of Mexico and Texas. He was fleeing one of the regions where the genocide carried out by Efrain Rios Montt, the former president of Guatemala, occurred in the 1980s. And so this legacy is still with us. And Rios Montt is on trial right now. He is being held accountable under universal jurisdiction. Universal jurisdiction means that any war criminal can be tried, can be held accountable by any court under international law. This is sort of implemented by a Spanish judge named Baltasar Garzón. And this is deeply worrying to Israeli leaders like Ehud Olmert and Tzipi Livni, and Dan Halutz, people who were implicated in the Goldstone report issued by the UN. That's why the Israeli government refers to these efforts to hold war crimes accountable as lawfare, as an actual attack on their right to exist. And they have lots of programs to attack lawyers who participate in what they consider lawfare. Lawyers like Michael Ratner, the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York. So why am I bringing up Guatemala and Rios Montt? Well, this genocide that Efrain Rios Montt committed would have been absolutely impossible without assistance from the State of Israel. In 1977, Jimmy Carter ended aid to the Guatemalan government because the human rights abuses had grown so severe. And so the U.S. Had been building its relationship with Israel since 1967. It really came to a head when Moshe Dayan, the former Israeli chief of staff, the great eye-patched hero of many, especially Americans who revere Israel, went to Vietnam and lauded the Vietnam War. And he said, we won in 1967 and you guys are losing. You need to look to us as a model for military success and for fighting what you will soon confront in the future, terrorism. And Israel really made itself valuable to the United States in the 80s. The U.S. had wanted to put out this leftist insurgency in Guatemala because it threatened many U.S. corporations, especially the United Fruit Company, by giving land rights to peasants, by giving land rights to Mayans who were caught in the middle of this civil war. And so the U.S. turned to Israel as a surrogate, shipping arms to the government of Guatemala, shipping Uzis. Guatemalan soldiers were carrying out these massacres with Uzis, which was the trademark of the Israeli soldier. In fact, Efrain Rios Montt said, this is a quote, "The Israeli soldier is our model." He said, our soldiers, he told ABC in 1982, our soldiers were trained by Israelis. But it wasn't just the training and the weapons, it was the intelligence. According to an article in Mother Jones in 1985, the Israeli government gave the Guatemalan military the computer it used to register and identify everyone who it wanted to arrest, who it wanted to torture, who it wanted to kill. 80% of the Guatemalan population registry was kept in this computer. And Yossi Sarid was one of the few, he still writes for Haaretz, he's kind of a left-wing Zionist figure. One of the few Israelis who actually complained about this was Sarid on the Knesset floor, and he said, we're actively participating in a genocide in Guatemala. And he was shouted down. The Likud legislator told him, and this is a really important quote, Yossi, we can't sell your speeches around the world, but we can sell arms. In other words, we're in a perpetual state of warfare here. Our existence is in peril, as all settler colonial states are. How can we maintain a value to the world, and especially if the Cold War ends? So occupation became a boon because they were honing and refining techniques on the Palestinian indigenous population who they sought to dominate and control in perpetuity and selling them to the world. That's how they became valuable to Guatemala, and as a proxy became valuable to the United States. And it's how they continue to maintain, to some degree, their value to the United States. I'm talking about this because I'm going to build up to Obama's visit to Israel, and that's kind of how I'm going to end. We're going to get to the Ziojuana, don't worry. Also, if you guys behave, there's going to be food before the Q&A. And I hope we get a lot of good, engaging Q&A. Cold War ended, and that was dangerous for the state of Israel. It couldn't really be a U.S. proxy anymore. What Reagan's former Secretary of State Alexander Haig called our Air Force base in the Middle East. That was basically what he said. So Israel has sort of sought to rebrand itself, but it's had to recalibrate its special relationship with the U.S. A lot more went into lobbying, political lobbying, Hasbara, which is Hebrew for explanation, but which also is propaganda. We're seeing a lot of that, more and more. We see a lot of that on campus. We might even see some of it tonight. And at the state level, we see massive lobbying that goes kind of beneath the radar, not just with politicians. And Bob McDonnell, the governor of Virginia, the guy who wrote in his PhD that feminism was a threat to humanity, and that women needed to pledge submission before men. A wonderful progressive figure was taken to Israel, I think in 2011, to study counterterrorism. And this is happening across the level including to local cops across the country. And then and Israeli officials are coming to talk on the border about how to manage this increasingly militarized border, how to stop these lions coming from Guatemala. Israeli Brigadier General Roy Elkabetz recently spoke at the Border Expo Control and Management Conference in El Paso, Texas in 2012. He said the nature of war is changing, there are no big wars, and so you need to emulate our model of warfare, which is quote-unquote asymmetrical. And really what it means is we are dealing with an occupied population that can do nothing but resist a besieged population. And we have the means for managing this population. If you're going to try to manage your population in the inner city, you're trying to manage indigenous people and poor people coming from Mexico, we have the techniques, we have the means. Turkish intelligence recently published a list of Israeli soldiers who raided the Mavi Marmara, which was part of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla in 2010. This was a raid that killed 9 activists, including an American citizen named Furkan Dogan. According to the initial UN fact-finding report, Dogan was shot in both legs and then was killed execution style at point-blank range with 4 bullets to the head. He was holding a camera in his hands. Dangerous to film people, very terroristic while they're shooting. And Roy Elkabetz, who spoke at this border conference, turned up along this list of names of people who raided the Mavi Marmara. So now he's here to educate Border Patrol officers and U.S. Customs and Enforcement officers on how to manage the population along the border. I think that's a pretty dangerous precedent. It's something that Jeff Halper, the head of the Israeli Committee Against Home Demolition, calls the global Gaza. In other words, the Gaza Strip, this besieged area, 80% refugees. And by the way, Israeli administrators manage the calorie count of every resident of the Gaza Strip. According to Dov Weissglass, who was the former fixer for Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, we won't starve them, we'll just put them on a diet, and that's exactly what they're doing. Gaza has become a laboratory for the West, especially the United States, and that again is a boon to Israel in trying to maintain its value in the world, trying to avoid isolation. So there are many groups in the United States that are acting on behalf of the Israeli government, like the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, JINSA, which had previously advised Benjamin Netanyahu in the late 90s. I really urge you to look up the Clean Break document. It's called a Clean Break, made by 2 former advisors to Netanyahu, who were JINSA staffers who later went on to advise George W. Bush. I'm referring to Richard Crowe and Doug Feith. This was sort of a document that many consider to be a blueprint for the war in Iraq. And I personally don't think Israel played a major role in taking us to war in Iraq, just for the record. But it's worth looking at. Now, JINSA, what it's been increasingly doing is taking cops to Israel and educating cops in the U.S. on Israeli techniques that it has mastered on a population that is occupied, dominated, and controlled. The Israelis changed the way we do business regarding homeland security in New Jersey, said Richard Fuentes, the New Jersey State Police Superintendent. The Anti-Defamation League, who's attacking SJP chapters across campus, has taken over 115 law enforcement officials at every level to Israel, including to view the separation wall, something that many people call an apartheid wall. And I would probably agree with that analysis. Benjamin Netanyahu, by the way, I'm going to get into this later, said that that wall is not necessary for security reasons, but to demographic spillover. Think about that language. I can honestly say that the training offered by the ADL is the most useful and current training course I ever attended. That was the Deputy Commissioner of the Philadelphia Police Force, Thomas Wright. Now, the NYPD is one of the most troubled police forces in the country. I live in New York now, and I see the stop and frisks in the street where young men of color are stopped on a regular basis. They're searched. Their Sixth Amendment rights are absolutely violated. But the NYPD has set up a demographics unit. It's called the demographics unit. Where do you hear that language? And it's designed explicitly to spy on and monitor Muslim communities around the city. And it was developed with intensive involvement with the CIA and with the involvement of a former Middle East station chief, who I believe was based NYPD operates a taxpayer expense office in Tel Aviv. That's part of this lobbying initiative I'm trying to describe. Since 2002, the NYPD has dispatched undercover agents known as mosque breakers into mosques, Pakistani-American bookstores, Palestinian shisha bars, to search out terror recruitment and clandestine funding. I go often to these shisha bars, but to search out only tea, because the shishas is too strong for me. I really say no to shisha. It's like smoking a whole pack of cigarettes. I'm trying to help the youth here. So, this story is broken by the Associated Press. And here's what the Associated Press said in its report. I'm quoting directly. The Demographics Unit is attempting to, quote-unquote, map the city's human terrain through a program modeled in part on how Israeli authorities operate in the West Bank. Now, that shows a clear line between the Israeli occupation and the kind of experiences that Americans who did not fit the typical, I would say, racist American profile, like me, have to endure. Now, the stop and frisk program, I'm not making any Israeli connection there. It's sort of a mentality. But let me just give you two quotes. Deputy Inspector of the NYPD, Christopher McCormack, was heard telling one of his underlings that he needed to stop the right people at the right time at the right location. And when he asked what he meant, the underling said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Blacks and Hispanics." That's what he said. Then he goes on, "I have no problem telling you this. Male blacks, I told you at roll call. Male blacks, 14 to 21. Now, the former head of the NYPD, Ray Kelly, was taken to a conference in Israel called Herzliya Security Conference. A lot of journalists refer to it as the neocon Woodstock. There's many neoconservatives from the U.S. and Israeli securitocrats go there to talk about how to handle demographic threats. And here's what an Israeli-American academic named Martin Kramer, a neoconservative, someone who's very close to Netanyahu, but also close to a lot of Republicans in Washington, said from the same stage as Ray Kelly, the NYPD chief. He said that Israel's blockade of Gaza, justifying the siege of Gaza, was helping reduce the numbers of superfluous young men of fighting age. Superfluous young men of fighting age. Do you understand that language? It means they're surplus humanity who have to be warehoused forever. Their lives don't count, and their very existence is a threat to the state of Israel. He said, if a state can't control these young men, then someone else will. It was a really extreme statement, and Kramer got really ashamed of what he said. It's funny because I do all these talks, and I don't get ashamed of my own words, but so often when these ultra-Zionist figures get their own words repeated back to them, they always have to find some way of squirming out of them. But this really goes into the heart of what Zionism is all about in the modern sense, in the current sense. It's about maintaining a Jewish state. And to maintain a Jewish state, it has to be an exclusively Jewish state, especially in the Arab world, where there wasn't a majority Jewish population. So they considered the indigenous Palestinians to be a demographic threat. That's why in 1947 and 1948, 750,000 indigenous Palestinians had to be ethnically cleansed. This actually started well before the declaration of the State of Israel on May 15, 1948, and it continued through Plan Dalet, which was a planned and orchestrated endeavor to rid the land of as many Palestinians and carve out an exclusively Jewish state. It's why they can't be allowed back. Now, fine, argue about what happened in 1948. I personally think Nakba denial, the denial of the Palestinian Nakba, is the ethical equivalent to the kind of genocide denial that's being practiced in Guatemala, where supporters of Rios Montt are denying to this day that there was any genocide that took place. But argue about that. No supporter of Israel that I know will support the return of the refugees, the Palestinian refugees and their descendants. And I would urge anyone to visit a refugee camp and see if that changes your mind. It's really shocking, especially in Lebanon, where I visited. Israel, as a condition of its acceptance to the UN General Assembly in 1949, was forced to accept Resolution 94, providing for the right of return of the Palestinian refugees. I could talk the rest of the day about all of the tricks, and even the assassination of Count Volky Bernadotte, who was brought there to bring the refugees back. I could talk for the rest of the day about the lengths that Israel's gone to avoid fulfilling the treaties that it signed. You can't allow them to come back, because if they come back, it will no longer be, the Jewish demographic majority will be gone. That's why the greatest threat to the state of Israel is not rockets from Hamas or rockets from Hezbollah. It's what? I'll take a volunteer. Anyone know what the greatest threat is? Demographic. Arab babies, gestating Arab fetuses is the greatest threat. And so Israel has to take measures to limit the population of Palestinians inside the frontiers that it controls. That's what its version of the two-state solution is about. It's putting most of the Arab population, the Palestinian population, in population clusters, what South Africa called Bantustan, and giving them a quasi-state, or what Yitzhak Rabin called before the Knesset, an entity that is less than a state, with no real sovereignty, calling it a state and saying, we're done with them, they're not ours. Another thing that Israel has done recently is pass a law called the Citizenship and Entry Law. This is a law that would be forbidden in the United States, but raises kind of a dark past, especially when you think about the so-called black codes that were implemented in Virginia before and after slavery to limit the rights of African Americans and even limit their population. This law forbids Palestinians from the West Bank from marrying Palestinian citizens of Israel. In other words, it's designed to prevent family unification. Now, usually when Israel passes these kind of laws, like they passed, when let's say they have Highway 443, which is restricted to most Palestinians, so you could call that an apartheid road. You could say it's an Israelis-only road, but they'll say we need this road for security because there are attacks on our drivers. But in the case of this law, which had to be approved by the Israeli Supreme Court, had to be approved in the Knesset, there was no mention of security. They said simply this is a demographic imperative. We need this law to limit the population of Arabs. It's one of the first times that happened. Don't call it apartheid, call it blizzardblasting or whatever, some kind of Bill Cosby-esque word, I don't know. The reason they don't want to call it apartheid is because apartheid is a crime under international law, and it's not just limited to the state of South Africa. If you read the apartheid resolution at the UN, which the United States initially fervently opposed, you'll find that it's limited to nothing. Anyone who practices apartheid, according to this international law, must be sanctioned until they end it. I wanted to go on about security cooperation, but we won't have time for a food or Q&A. I don't want anyone to be hungry. I want to talk about how the special relationship, just a few examples of how the special relationship has limited the citizenship rights of certain Americans. I know that sounds crazy, but I've kind of experienced it myself. And I experienced it, when I go through the airport, Ben Gurion International Airport, I enter the frontiers controlled by Israel, the Allenby Bridge. I'm treated pretty well. They ask me if I'm Jewish. They ask me who my grandparents are. And then they ask me what Hebrew school I went to sometimes, and who my rabbi was. And then I'm waved through, and I say, I'm going to see my girlfriend in Tel Aviv. I don't have a girlfriend in Tel Aviv, but just the idea that I'm going to inject an Israeli Jewish woman with Jewish babies and offset the demographic threat that brings a smile to the young security officer's face and once led her to wave me through an initial screening check on my bags. If you are an American citizen, but you're of Arab descent, especially if you're Palestinian, you're going to be treated pretty much in a different way. Even Donna Shalala, who is, I think, the former Health and Human Services Secretary under the Clinton administration, who is of Lebanese descent, was held in what many of you know of as the Arab room. It's the room the Arabs are taken in. She was interrogated and sort of humiliated for 3 hours despite her VIP status because of her Arab last name. The irony was that she was on her way to Israel as the president of the University of Miami to combat BDS on campus, to network with other university presidents on how to fight this. So her interrogation was sort of poetic justice. But something more disturbing happened. I was in Ramallah recently. And in Ramallah, you can kind of forget the occupation exists. It's what, the Ramallah experience is like the 5-star occupation. There's a lot of internationals there, a lot of Palestinian Americans who are from schools like this, go there after college, and there's a lot of drinking, and there's a veneer of prosperity, and then it's surrounded by checkpoints and settlements. But inside you can forget. But actually, it was hard to forget. I was sitting in my friend's living room, my friend Rhonda, who actually headed the Columbia University SJP for several years. And she got a call from a friend named Ziojuana, who was a teacher at the Quaker school in Ramallah. This is a school that many elite Palestinians go to. It's a very good school. It's sort of a local institution. She was working, the school is funded by USAID, the US government agency. She had a USAID visa, and the Israelis would not let her through. She had gone to Jordan to visit a friend, and they wouldn't let her through, and she was crying on the phone to Rhonda. She said, "What do I do?" And he said, "Just don't worry, calm down, call the US embassy, they'll help you, we're gonna get, a lawyer." And so she called the US embassy, and they told her re-enter later on. And so she tried to re-enter a month later. She was held this time for 8 hours and deported. I think at least for 10 years, permanently. She wrote a letter to Barack Obama, who said nothing about this. And the US Embassy did nothing about this. She said, "I was raised in Tennessee and grew up with stories of a Jim Crow past. The parallels of discrimination are ever present in this type of treatment. Mr. President, what is your administration doing to stop this discrimination against US citizens? I've received no help from the US Embassy or consulate. When you meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu this week, ask him why an ally and the largest recipient of US aid treats American citizens this way. When you visit Ramallah, you'll be a few blocks away from my students to whom I cannot return. Instead of another closed-door meeting, I urge you to consider addressing them, many of whom are dual citizens and their interrupted right to an education." In my opinion, this didn't happen. There are other people who have this experience. Maybe you know a few. One was named Sandra Tamari. She wrote, after being deported, "I found it curious that the first question the US Embassy staff asked me is, 'Are you Jewish?' In fact, the State Department warns that Americans of Arab or Muslim descent, and I've seen this material, you can go to the State Department website, may experience significant difficulties entering Israel or the West Bank." It's like they're referring to a health risk or something, but it's something that they accept and will do nothing about because of the special relationship. And State Department officials have asked people if they are Jewish, and when they were told that they were not Jewish, as in the case of Sandra Tamari, they were told there's nothing we can do to help you. It's all on the record. In fact, the State Department's been asked about this by the Associated Press's Matt Lee. So what I'm saying is, because of the special relationship, if you do not fit the profile of the typical American, and you're trying to enter Israeli-controlled frontiers, your citizenship has been delegitimized and compromised. And it's completely unacceptable that this government would do that. It's just never brought up. If you or me, you are given a birth